Famous billionaire asked Maid's black daughter to translate a rare language. Unaware. She's a genius linguist, and what occurred next ruined his career totally. Let's ask the young lady over there to see if she can translate. Perhaps she will have more luck than we did. Dr. Roberto Mancini's caustic laughter could be heard all around the University of São Paulo's auditorium, where the best linguists in the country had come together for the International Congress of Lost Languages. Everyone looked at Letitia, who was just 16 and quietly scrubbing the coffee break tables at the back of the hall. Donna Carmen's daughter worked as an outsourced cleaner at the university for more than 10 years. The child usually went to important events with her mother to help the family make money. It was so quiet in the auditorium that it hurt. 50 of Brazil's best-known linguists watched the sight with a mix of shame and morbid interest. Dr. Manzini, who is famed for being the man who speaks 30 languages on TV, had just made a black teenager from the suburbs look bad in front of everyone. "Roberto, this isn't necessary," Professor Helena Carvalho said softly, trying to calm things down. But it was evident that Dr. Manzani was angry with himself for not being able to figure out the strange symbols that had been flashed on the screen 3 hours earlier. The stone inscription that was recently found during an excavation in the middle of Minas Gerais was a problem for all the experts there. The symbols seemed like a blend of Old Portuguese and Native American elements, but no one could figure out what they meant. For a few seconds, Liticus stood still with the cleaning cloth still in her hands. Her heart was beating, but not because she was scared. It was for a different reason. She wasn't surprised by the symbols on the screen. In fact, they were as familiar to her as the stories her great-grandfather told her on Sunday afternoons. "No need, doctor. She's just a girl," remarked Don Caraman, who instantly walked over to her daughter, her face flushed with humiliation and wrath. "On the contrary," Dr. Manzani clapped his hands, evidently relishing being harsh. "I'm really interested to hear what our young expert has to say about this inscription that has been puzzling smart people all day." What Dr. Roberto Manzani didn't know was that Licia Santos was more than simply the cleaning lady's daughter. She taught herself to read and write at the age of 8, read books from a university library while her mother was at work, learned 6 languages, and wrote letters to European researchers under a fake name. More significantly, she was the great-granddaughter of the last Colomba elder who knew the secret language of fleeing slaves. This code was created over 200 years ago so that communities concealed in the mountains of Minas Gerais could talk to each other. Letitia gazed at the screen, then at Dr. Manzini, and then at her mom. Some of the more observant teachers noticed that something sparkled in her eyes, and knew that this girl was about to turn the embarrassment into something that no one present would ever forget. If you like learning how prejudice can teach you the most important lesson in humility, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. What Lydia did next not only changed the history of Brazilian linguistics, but it also taught Dr. Manzan that underestimating someone can be the biggest mistake of a person's life. "Come on, don't be shy," Dr. Manzini said, waving his arms around in front of the audience. "You might see these symbols in a different light, a view that is more like a folk tale." He said the word folkloric with so much disdain that a few professors squirmed uneasily in their chairs. But Dr. Manzini was clearly enjoying his own show of academic cruelty, which was fueled by the fact that he had been attempting to figure out the inscription for 3 hours straight. "Roberto, this has gone too far," said Professor Carlos Medina, a specialist in native languages. But several of his colleagues were too scared to speak up, and only laughed nervously. Licia stood still, watching Dr. Manzini with a calmness that even her mother found surprising. Donna Carmen knew that look well. It was the same look her father, old Samuel, got when someone didn't respect the knowledge of the forefathers. A glance that predicted a storm even when everything were calm. "What do you think is the most impressive thing about this?" Dr. Manzani went on, evidently drunk with his own pride. It's how certain individuals always think they get complicated things just because, you know. He stopped for a long time, letting the bigotry hang in the air without saying it all out loud. Dr. Roberto Manzani had no idea that he was about to commit the biggest blunder of his 25 years in academia. Leticia Santos didn't only teach herself. She was a linguistic genius who wrote letters to scholars at Oxford University under the name Sylvie. These letters helped with research on how to keep African languages alive in Brazil. When she was 12, as other kids played in the playground, Leticia figured out how to read Yoruba by listening to Candomblé chanting from her neighbor's terreiro. By the time she was 14, she knew enough Latin, French, and Italian to interpret old documents she found in the university archives while her mother was on the night shift. But the most valuable knowledge she had came from a place that none of those well-known scholars would ever be able to go to. Her great-grandfather Samuel was the last person to know the secret language that the Quambulas of Minas Gera made up so they could talk to each other without being found by slave hunters. Donna Carmen whispered to my daughter, "Please, let's go," and gently pulled on Licius's arm. Every line on her worn face showed how embarrassed she felt. Cleaning the halls of that university for 20 years taught her that individuals like them shouldn't stand out. "No, Mom," Letitia said gently, but with a determination that made her mother back off. "He needs to know this." Dr. Manzini laughed a lot. "What do you want to hear? Do you honestly think you can add to a serious scholarly discussion?" He pointed at the screen. "The best historical linguists in the country can't figure out what these symbols mean. What could someone like you, who is so well off, possibly know about this?" Everyone in the room was now paying great attention to what was going on. Some professors seemed really uncomfortable, but no one wanted to interrupt Dr. Manzini. He was the guy who was on TV shows, the most quoted academic in the field of linguistics, and the university's pride. Licia responded, "Actually," in a low but distinct voice, "my great-grandfather showed me how to write this." The hush that followed was so deep that you could hear the air conditioning humming. Dr. Manzani blinked a few times, as if he were trying to figure out if he had heard right. "Your great-grandfather!" His laugh boomed around the auditorium. "Oh, how nice. And where did your great-grandfather learn about historical linguistics?" "At the Life University. I think he was a Quilula," Literature simply said. "One of the last who knew the language of the fugitives." Kuala, Dr. Manzini repeated the term as if it were something strange and funny. "How sweet. And now you're going to tell us that this stone has recipes for FA or directions for producing Rapidora." People in different places of the auditorium started to laugh nervously. Donna Carmen's eyes were burning with tears, but they weren't tears of sadness. She felt a profound, quiet fury that she didn't let herself feel very often. Leticia, on the other hand, stayed calm. Girl wisdom does not shout. It whispers to those who know how to listen. Her great-grandfather Samuel often said, at the end of his stories about her ancestors. "Dr. Manzini," she responded, her voice sounding more authoritative than typical for a teenager. "You read these symbols as they were Old Portuguese, don't you?" The respected linguist was surprised by the question. "Well, the grammatical structure makes it quite evident." Licia gently cut him off and said, "That's why you can't translate them. Because it's not Old Portuguese. It's a language of defiance." Dr. Manzani's stomach felt like it was stirring up something bad. That girl spoke with a certainty that didn't make sense, a certainty that made him very upset. He said resistance again and again, seeking to take back control of the situation. "How dramatic! And it's clear that you're the only person in Brazil who knows this language of resistance." Licia probably said this with such passion that a few professors leaned forward in their chairs. 5 years ago, my great-grandfather died. He said I was the last. The way she said it, without drama or self-pity, just as a basic, awful fact, made the whole audience become quiet. Dr. Manzini even seemed surprised for a time, but his pride came back immediately. "So, we have an interesting predicament now, don't we?" The last person who spoke a dead language is now working as, "What do you do here?" "Yes, cleaning." The severity of the observation slashed through the air like a knife. Donna Karaman held back a sob, but Letitia stayed strong. But her eyes now had something in them that made some of the more observant professors recognize that the way the public humiliation was going was changing. Dr. Manzani went on, apparently delighted with himself. "What about showing that old wisdom? Please translate that line for us." He aimed the red laser toward the first line of the writing. "Show that you're not just making things up." Letitia gazed at the screen, then at Dr. Manzini, and finally at her mom. What she saw on Donna Carmen's worn and embarrassed face brought something out of her soul. The same strength that had kept her forefathers going when the whole world was against them. "Can I use the microphone?" she requested, and her voice had an authority that made Dr. Manzani pause for a second. The well-known linguist looked around and saw that everyone was looking at him, waiting for him to say something. He had gone too far to turn back now. "Of course," he responded, waving his hands in the air. "The stage is yours." As Letitia stepped up to the microphone, the way she moved with the quiet dignity of someone who carries the weight of history on her shoulders made some professors wonder whether they were about to see something that would change their lives forever. There is a difference between pretending to be confident and actually being calm when you know something that the rest of the world doesn't. Letitia moved the microphone around like someone who had talked in front of a lot of people previously. Some teachers instantly sat up straighter in their chairs and paid more attention because of this strange confidence. She started with the opening line, her loud voice ringing out over the auditorium. "This is not Old Portuguese, as you are trying to read it. It is a mix of Yoruba, which was brought to the area by enslaved people, and local indigenous languages that were made just for Colombombos to talk to each other in secret." Dr. Manzanet laughed on purpose. What a creative idea! And where did a 16-year-old girl learn about hybrid language patterns on YouTube? But now Professor Helena Carvalho, who knows a lot about African languages in Brazil, was paying full attention. The way Letitia talked, not like a youngster making up theories, but like someone who really grasped complicated language systems, rang off alarm bells in her scholarly mind. Helena responded, "Please, go on," ignoring Dr. Mancini's angry look. Letitia pointed at the symbols on the screen. "The first symbol you thought was a mountain really signifies place to hide." She pointed to another one and said, "This one is not a river. It's the trail that goes away." The complete phrase means where the path that disappears meets the place to hide. The Brothers of Freedom wrote their names down. The auditorium was rather quiet. A few academics started writing quickly in their notebooks. This time, the translation made sense in a manner that none of the others had. Dr. Manzini mumbled, "Impossible," but his voice no longer seemed so sure of itself. "This is just a guess based on stories that have been passed down." Lydia went on, and even Donna Carmen was impressed by how calm she was. "I can back up what I'm saying." She took a notebook that was old and worn out of her back pocket. "This was given to me by my great-grandfather. These are his notes about the Colombo's language." Professor Helena got up from her chair. "Can I see that?" Dr. Manzini took a step forward. "Helena, you can't be serious. Are we going to believe a notebook of family stories?" But Helena was already going toward the platform, her eyes blazing with a scholarly curiosity that had made her one of the country's foremost experts on Afro-Brazilian linguistics. Her face altered drastically when she picked up the notebook. The yellowed sheets had more than just words. They also had complicated phonetic diagrams, in-depth grammatical analysis, and even parallels to other African languages. This was not the work of a simple person. It was the outcome of a mind that was both smart and well-organized. Helena muttered, "My God," as she turned the pages. "This is work at the college level." Samuel Santos carefully wrote down a Creole language that we thought was gone for good. Santos. Dr. Manzini frowned. "That name rings a bell." Helena's voice was full of respect, as she said that Samuel Santos was one of the most respected Afro-Brazilian linguists of the 1980s. Before he left academia, he wrote 3 important studies about preserving language in Colomba villages. Letitia had to swallow hard. There, in front of dozens of strangers, she was learning about her great-grandfather's life, something she had never known before. He told them he didn't want to talk to colleges anymore. He wanted to teach the kids in his neighborhood instead. And you, Helena, stared at Leisha with a look of mounting shock. You are the daughter of Samuel Santos. Great-granddaughter, Leticia kindly corrected. Dr. Manzini felt the ground start to give way under his feet. Samuel Santos was more than just a well-known name. He was a famous figure in Brazilian linguistics, someone whose work he had already talked about in his own pieces when he was just starting out. He said that doesn't change anything. His voice sounded desperate, even to him. A teen can't just turn up and figure something out that experts like you have already done. Letitia cut him off for the first time. Her voice was still polite, but it had a new authority. With all due respect, Dr. Manzani, you spent 3 hours trying to decipher these symbols as if they were Old Portuguese. My great-grandfather taught me, though, that the Quambo's language was never meant to hide clear meanings. It was about establishing layers of safety. She walked over to the screen and pointed to a certain set of symbols. Check out this pattern. You thought it was a verb in the past tense, but it's really a time marker that shows the messages for the future. This whole inscription is a letter, but not to people who are alive now. It's to those who will come after them. Professor Helena was now completely absorbed in the notebook, her hands trembling slightly as she read, Letitia, your great-grandfather didn't just document this language. He created a transliteration system that allows anyone who is literate to learn the basic structure. He said that knowledge should not die with him. Literature replied, her words carrying the weight of an ancestral responsibility. Dr. Manzini looked around and realized he had completely lost control of the situation. Other professors were now standing up, some picking up phones to make calls, others frantically taking notes. The discovery was happening right before his eyes, and he was on the wrong side of it. This is ridiculous, he said, louder than he intended. Are you really going to give credence to an cleaning lady who shows up with an old notebook and some fanciful theories? The silence that followed was icy. Even the professors, who had laughed at his previous jokes, now looked at him with a mixture of embarrassment and disapproval. Dr. Manzini had crossed a line that could no longer be ignored. Roberto, Professor Helena said, her voice cutting like a knife, I suggest you sit down and listen because, if what literature is showing us is true, and all signs indicate that it is, you have just tried to discredit one of the greatest linguistic discoveries of the decade. Donna Karaman, who had remained standing at the back of the auditorium, felt hot tears streaming down her face. They were not tears of shame, but of pride so intense that it threatened to overflow from her chest. Her daughter, was there commanding the attention of some of the brightest minds in the country. Letitia took a deep breath. Professor Manzini, may I continue with the complete translation? Because what my great-grandfather left on this stone is not just a message, it's a map. A map? Helena asked, her eyes widening to other Columbambos, other inscriptions, other messages that are still waiting to be found. Letitia looked directly at Dr. Manzini. If you had managed to translate that first inscription correctly, you would have realized that it contains coordinates, not geographical, but linguistic clues about where the Kumbalas hid more records of their language. The entire room was now in absolute silence. The magnitude of what was being revealed was becoming clear to everyone present. It wasn't just a translation. It was the discovery of a linguistic treasure that could rewrite the understanding of cultural preservation in Brazil. Dr. Manzini sat heavily in a chair in the front row, his arrogance finally dissolving into a mixture of shock and a growing fear of what was yet to come, because he was beginning to realize that he had underestimated not just any teenager but someone who carried in her veins the legacy of one of the greatest linguists Brazil had ever produced, and as Letitia prepared to reveal the true scope of what her family had kept hidden for decades, one question hung in the air. How many other academic treasures have been ignored simply because they came from the right hands but the wrong color? The answer to that question was about to transform not only that afternoon, but the entire career of anyone who still had the courage to call that discovery folklore. Linguistic coordinates, Dr. Manzani repeated, his voice now visibly trembling. That's completely speculative. You can't just invent academic methodologies. Letitia ignored him completely and addressed Professor Helena directly. Can I use the auditorium projector? I need to show you something that will change the way you understand linguistic preservation in Brazil. Of course, Helena replied immediately, her eyes shining with a scientific curiosity that had become academic urgency. As Letitia connected her personal laptop to the projection system, Dr. Manzini felt the first real chill in his stomach. Something about that girl's absolute confidence didn't make sense. Teenagers didn't have laptops full of academic research. Teenagers didn't talk about methodologies with such ease. The large screen lit up, revealing a meticulously organized presentation titled Linguistic Mapping of the Columbombos of Minas Gerais, an International Collaborative Study. The name of the lead author silenced the entire auditorium. LSE University of Oxford Department of Applied Linguistics. Impossible, Dr. Manzani whispered, but his voice was swallowed by the sound of chairs creaking as all the professors leaned forward to get a better look. El Silveira, Professor Helena murmured, recognizing the name immediately. Do you know El Sila's work? Roberto, he is one of the most cited researchers in studies on the preservation of African languages in Brazil. He has been working in collaboration with Oxford for over 3 years. Letitia moved on to the second slide, which showed a series of photographs of other similar inscriptions, found in different regions of Minas Gerais. These are the coordinates my great-grandfather left on the first stone. Over the past 4 years, an international team and I have located and translated 17 different inscriptions. 4 years, Dr. Manzini gasped. You were 12-13 when I published my first article, Letitia corrected calmly. That's when Professor Richardson from Oxford invited me to officially collaborate with his department. The presentation continued, revealing a work of research so sophisticated that it left everyone present in absolute shock. Detailed maps, comparative linguistic analyses, data tables that had taken years to compile. It was not the work of a teenager. It was the result of an academic mind operating at the highest international level. My God, Professor Carlos Medina muttered frantically, scrolling through his cell phone. El Silva Letitia. Silva Santos. She's on Nature magazine's list of the most promising young researchers. She has a full scholarship to Oxford University, waiting for her to finish high school. Dr. Manzini felt the world begin to crumble around him. This can't be happening, he muttered. But his voice was drowned out by the growing murmur of admiration and amazement from his colleagues. Letitia moved on to a slide showing a series of emails. Professor Manzini, would you like to know how I found out you would be here today? The question was asked with an icy politeness that made several professors shiver. Dr. Manzini couldn't respond, just stared at the screen. You sent an email to Professor Richardson 3 weeks ago requesting advice on primitive Afro-Brazilian dialects for your presentation today. Professor Richardson forwarded the email to me as I am the specialist on his team for this specific topic. The slide showed the entire email exchange. Dr. Manzani had written, I found an interesting inscription that could yield an impactful article if explored properly. I need a quick consultation to impress at the conference in Sao Paulo. You are literally asking for help from the same person you just tried to publicly humiliate, Laya continued, her voice maintaining the same polite and devastating tone. My response, which you obviously did not receive because you asked to speak only with senior researchers, was, the inscription you are analyzing is part of a linguistic system that I have been studying for years. It would be an honor to mentor you personally." The silence in the auditorium was so profound that you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Dr. Manzini was pale as a ghost, his arrogance completely evaporated. "I came here today," Leticia continued, "expecting to meet Dr. Roberto Manzani, who had read my articles and wanted to respectfully collaborate with my research. Instead, I found someone who thought he could appropriate my work and even use me as cruel entertainment." Professor Helena was now standing, her eyes shining with an indignation that transcended the academic and became deeply personal. "Roberto, you tried to humiliate one of the greatest promises in world linguistics, a researcher who has already contributed more to our field at age 16 than some of us have in entire decades." Dr. Manzani tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out around him. Colleagues who had laughed at his cruel jokes now looked at him with a mixture of disgust and vicarious embarrassment. "The saddest part," Leticia said, saving one last presentation, "is that you really are competent. I read your articles from the 1990s. They were good, but at some point it seems you began to confuse knowledge with arrogance and competence with superiority. The last slide showed Leticia's complete academic resume. 3 articles published in international journals, 2 presentations at European conferences, proven fluency in 7 languages, and a list of collaborations with universities around the world. I am not the lucky daughter of a cleaning lady," she said, looking directly at Dr. Manzini. "I am Leticia Santos, a linguist researcher at Oxford University, a specialist in the preservation of African languages in Brazil. And yes, I am also the daughter of Dona Carmen, who works with dignity to support our family while I study." Dr. Manzani finally found his voice, but it came out as a desperate whisper. I didn't know. How could I have known?" "That's exactly the problem," Leisha replied with a calmness that cut deeper than any scream. "You never bothered to find out. You saw a black girl cleaning tables and immediately decided that I couldn't have anything of value to offer. Your prejudice is so deep that you can't even recognize excellence when it's right in front of you." The auditorium erupted in murmurs. Some professors were clearly embarrassed by their own silent complicity. Others were photographing the slides to save the information about Leticia's findings. Dona Carmen, still at the back of the auditorium, was crying openly, not out of shame, but out of pride so immense that it seemed to overflow from her chest. Her daughter had not only defended herself, she had completely rewritten the rules of the game. "Professor Manzani," Professor Helena said, her voice sharp, "I believe you have some apologies to make and some explanations to give to this university's ethics committee." But Dr. Manzini was already getting up, gathering his papers with trembling hands. His career, built on decades of self-promotion and arrogance disguised as competence, had collapsed in 15 minutes. The cameras of the journalists present had captured every second of his humiliation, and he knew that by the end of the day, he would be on social media as an example of everything that was wrong with Brazilian academia. As he walked toward the exit, trying to maintain some semblance of dignity, Leisha called him one last time. "Dr. Manzini," she continued, her voice now strong enough that no one else in the room would dare to contradict it. "Do you still need my aid with your research?" The question, offered with deadly but polite irony, was the last straw. Dr. Manzan almost sprinted out of the auditorium, leaving behind not just his reputation, but also any hope that his career could survive what had just happened. Because sometimes you don't need to be angry or seek retribution to get justice. It can be helpful to hear the truth from someone who wasn't afraid to speak up when others confused privilege with skill. And even while Dr. Manzani withdrew into the university's halls, where they would now examine every piece he had ever published, she stayed on stage, no longer as the cleaning lady's invisible daughter, but as what she had always been, one of the smartest people of her generation. 6 months later, Dr. Roberto Manzani watched the nightly news from the window of his little flat. It showed Leticia being welcomed to Oxford as the university's youngest associate researcher ever. After the video of his humiliation went viral and got 15 million views in a week, his career was over. Manzini was fired from the University of Sao Paulo for behavior that went against academic values. They canceled his TV appearances. There were no more invitations to conferences. The scientific community was even looking at and questioning his own past articles. At the same time, Leticia had grown famous all over the world. Under her direction, the Brazilian government set up a program to protect the country's languages. Netflix bought the rights to her story. Universities all across the world wanted her to work with them. Dona Carmen was now in charge of the cultural center that Litia had started on the suburbs of Sao Paulo. There, she taught kids about their cultural and linguistic roots. The pay was 10 times what it had been before. Lydia remarked in her most famous interview that the greatest way to get back at someone is not to hurt them. They will spend the rest of their life wondering how they missed our grandeur when it was right in front of them. Dr. Manzini turned off the TV and stayed in the dark. He learned too late that skin color and social standing don't determine how good someone is at something. Knowledge and character do. Leticia has shown that the world needs to be reminded that genius may come from anyone, bloom in any situation, and thrive despite all forms of bias. If this tale about how prejudice may teach you the most important lesson in humility has moved you, subscribe to the channel for more stories that show that true greatness always finds a way, no matter how many doors try to close it.